Welcome back to another episode of DiceDaddy. It's me, Bobby. First of all, I just want to thank everyone for subscribing, for liking, for viewing the videos. Just after 4 weeks, we're almost at 100 subs, so I really appreciate that. But today we're going to be talking specifically about it's what my character would do. And we're going to do this from a viewpoint of actually me, when I was a toxic player. And we're getting a little bit close today. We're going to get a little bit closer with each other. A little closer. A little closer. Not that close. That's too close. Yeah, let's get into it.
DiceDaddy.
It's what my character would do. It's what my character would do. It's what I think my character would do. No phrase in D&D has gotten so much slack for being a good thing and also a bad thing at the same time. Because when it comes down to it, I think everybody's really trying to do what their character would do. It's just sometimes people take that to a toxic level. So we're going to tell a story today, like I talked about earlier. We're going to talk about me when I was that toxic player, when I was that person saying, it's what my character would do. Now imagine, if you will, many, many years ago, I'm not going to say how long ago it was, younger Bobby was traipsing through high school, about a junior in high school. At this point, I had only played LARP games. I hadn't played anything else. But I saw this individual, and I met this individual from afar, this strange looking dude,
Some of that D&D, dog.
that introduced me to D&D. And it was a different experience. At that point, I didn't even know what D&D was. I'd heard of Dungeons and Dragons, but I didn't actually know what it was. Quick as can be, the next day after English class, I believe it was, I found myself sitting at a table, and I had myself really overwhelmed by the terminology of AC and hit points, and there was like papers flying everywhere and dice and people just throwing out these terms and pulling out rule books, and I had no idea what any of it meant. And to make matters worse, whenever the DM started to actually talk about the game, he described this scene of a tavern. I remember it distinctly, almost smelling like oak. That's the kind of phrasing that he used for it. He asked everyone at the table, which there was just 3 of us, he said,
What would you all like to do?
and I had no clue what I would like to do. So internally, I actually came up with this idea. I kind of made this sort of monologue in and of itself where I thought about what my character would do. At that point, I was playing a human fighter. It was the first time I'd ever played D&D. I didn't really understand it, but I sort of like almost imagined a background that I had never written out. And I kind of started to ask myself, what would my character do? And then I found myself doing those things based off of this sort of imaginary background that I kind of made up within my head. It was my first time role-playing. I didn't really understand what I was doing. Needless to say, I wasn't a very good player to be around because I kind of only focused on what I wanted to do in the game, and I kind of only focused on what would be good for my character, even though I was partied and traveling with this group, and that just didn't last very long. I don't remember what the DM was wearing. I think the DM was like, I think it was like a pirate game?
Army.
No, it might have been like a ninja game. That could have been a mafia game.
I don't know what mobsters say. Perfect.
I don't understand. It's been a long time, but the one thing that I took away from that game was that I wish I had a DM that actually pulled me aside and talked to me, because in my heart of hearts, I really was trying to be a role player. That's really what it came across as, but it really led to me just being a toxic player. So today we're going to actually talk about how to identify those players and then what to do whenever we identify them. First and foremost, if you have a player that's stealing from the party, murdering NPCs, running around with a big old axe and killing everything they want, kind of just destroying your plot and kind of ruining the fun at the table, and they're justifying all these things by saying, well, it's what my character would do. Pull that player aside and ask him a question. And I love asking people these questions whenever they use that excuse, because it's a valid question. I don't have to use it very often these days, but ask that player why. Why is that what your character would do? Now, you're usually going to get two responses if you ask a player this. Number one is they're going to repeat the same thing. It's just what I feel like they would do. It's what I feel like they would want to do. And that for me is kind of a red flag, because it means they haven't really thought about what their character would do, why the reasoning is behind that. So in that situation, you kind of have two options. You can either A, say, all right, well, you need to stop, or you can find a different table. Or B, go ahead and do me a favor, write out the reasonings as to why, and I want you to think about it and give me an example, almost like a backstory. Now, the other response you might get for that question is, here's a 10-page backstory that shows why I do what I do. Perfect. That's fine. If you have a player that's justifying that response, okay. But if that player's method is at the actual cost of everyone else's fun, then it's not okay. So I would remind that player in that scenario that he needs to really take a moment and think about if that's what his character would do, if this chaotic evil rogue that's stealing from the party is going to steal and murder people, he needs to take into account what the other players' characters are going to do. If they're going to put up with that, if that lawful good paladin's going to put up with that, if they had a good fighter's going to deal with that, and if that's actually going to make for a copacetic party that works moving forward. And if the player hasn't really thought about how other people will react to what his character is doing, then he hasn't actually thought about it. He's kind of just flying off the handle. But we as DMs need to educate and try to provide that to them. Now, if you don't want to do this method, that's perfectly fine. It's your table. But those are usually the two responses you get whenever you ask why. Now, the next thing I want to talk about are things that you should do as a DM to avoid this player altogether. And the first one is a session 0. Which if you haven't watched my increased immersion video, I recommend it just because it's really good. But a backstory, or a session 0, should I say, is where you lay down those rules. Is where you can say, hey, we're not doing PvP, hey, we're not stealing from the party, these are just rules that we're going to have. And if that's what works for your table, that's fine, and go with it. For me, I don't like to restrict people like that, so the second thing is what I like to talk about is an aligned purpose. If you as a DM are gonna allow your players to play everything from a chaotic evil character to a lawful good character, and you're allowing that into your game, and you want them to act out their actual characters, and you give them no goal to align their actions and to make it so that they're actually not killing each other, it's kind of on you. At least for me it is. I think that if you're gonna allow that into your game, that you're gonna have to come up with some way to facilitate a union amongst those players so that they don't do that to each other. Some sort of agreement in-game using either their backstory or some sort of in-game mechanic. But that's kind of where I am with that. It's what my character would do. I hope this was helpful for you. If not, sorry. Once again, thank you for the comments. Give me a like and subscribe if you want to hear more. You guys have a great night.